I still remember the first time he looked at me. Not as the daughter of a millionaire, not as the girl who grew up in a mansion with chandeliers and expensive furniture, but just as a woman standing there, awkwardly holding a stack of plates I had no idea how to carry. And the crazy part is, he thought I was the maid. It sounds like the beginning of some cheesy movie, right? The spoiled rich girl who hides in plain sight. But trust me, nothing about this felt like a movie. It was messy, confusing, embarrassing, and against all odds. The moment that changed everything for me. Let me back up a little. My father is the kind of man people either fear or admire. He built his fortune in construction, and everyone in town knows his name. Growing up, I was never just me. I was always Mr. Caldwell's daughter. People treated me differently, like I was fragile, or spoiled, or untouchable. I hated it. I wanted, more than anything, to be seen for who I was, not for what I inherited. So, one summer, when I came back from college, I decided to spend more time at home. My father had just hired a new driver, a man named Daniel. He wasn't like the other employees. He didn't stare at me like he was trying to guess the price of my shoes. He didn't nod too fast or compliment me just because of who my father was. Actually, the first time he saw me, he barely looked at me at all. And when he finally did, he thought I worked there. That day, the housekeeper had asked me to help set the table for a family dinner. I had never done it before, I'll be honest, but I wanted to try. So there I was, clumsy with the silverware, when Daniel walked into the dining room carrying a bag of groceries. He stopped, tilted his head, and said, "New maid?" With a smirk that carried just a hint of mischief. I should have corrected him right then. I should have said, "No, I'm not the maid. I live here." But for some reason, the words never left my mouth. Instead, I played along. Maybe it was the thrill of being anonymous, of not having to carry my father's name on my shoulders. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to know what it felt like to be judged for something other than my last name. And that's how it all started. At first, it was harmless. He would talk to me like I was just another worker in the house. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't overly nice either. He teased me when I messed up with chores, and I laughed it off, even though I had no clue how to do half the things he assumed I already knew. For once, I wasn't the heiress. I was just me, and it felt refreshing. But here's the thing about lies. They don't stay small. They grow and they wrap around you like vines, pulling you deeper and deeper until you don't even know how to get out. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd tell him the truth eventually. But with every conversation, every shared smile, every accidental touch of his hand against mine, I found myself more terrified of what would happen when the truth came out. Because against all reason, I started falling for him. Daniel wasn't the kind of man I was supposed to fall in love with. My father had plans for me to marry someone from our world, someone with the same kind of money, someone who could keep the family legacy strong. But Daniel, he came from the exact opposite side of life. He worked hard for every dollar he earned. He didn't care about appearances. He didn't measure people by their bank accounts. He had calloused hands, a stubborn streak, and a quiet strength that made me feel safe in a way no mansion ever could. And maybe that's what scared me the most. Because if he ever found out who I really was, he'd think I was just another spoiled girl playing a game. I used to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with questions I couldn't answer. Could love even exist between two people from such different worlds? Could he forgive me for letting him believe I was someone I wasn't? Or would this all come crashing down the second the truth slipped out? You know, people say money makes life easier. But in my case, money was the very thing that made love so complicated. And yet, even knowing the risks, I couldn't stop myself from wanting him. This is the story of how a simple misunderstanding, me being mistaken for the maid, led to the most unexpected, painful, and beautiful chapter of my life. It's not perfect. It's not fairy tale polished. but it's real. And it's mine. After that first night, when Daniel thought I was the new maid, I told myself it didn't matter. He was just another employee, someone who came and went. I thought, this will pass. He'll barely notice me. But that wasn't true. The next morning, I found myself lingering in the kitchen longer than usual, pretending to help, while the real staff did the actual work. I'm sure they rolled their eyes at me behind my back, but I didn't care. I wanted to see him again. And I did. He came in carrying a box of supplies for the house. His sleeves were rolled up, his shirt a little wrinkled, his hair slightly messy from the heat outside. He looked nothing like the polished men my father introduced me to at his fancy galas. Those men wore tailored suits and fake smiles. Daniel looked real. "Hey, new girl," he said with a grin, dropping the box on the counter with a thud. "You survive your first day?" I laughed awkwardly, pretending to wipe my hands on a towel like I'd been working hard. "Barely. They're tough here," he smirked, leaning against the counter. "Welcome to the club. You'll get used to it." Something about the way he said it made me feel included, like I belonged in a way I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't the boss's daughter. I was just a girl fumbling her way through chores. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to cross paths with him. Sometimes I'd offer to carry things I had no business carrying: boxes, bags, anything, just to have him laugh and take them from me with a shake of his head. "You're gonna hurt yourself," he'd say, and every time he said it, I felt a warmth in my chest that I couldn't explain. One afternoon, he caught me in the garage. I had no reason to be there except curiosity. He was cleaning the car, music playing softly from a little radio. I stood there, watching him, until he noticed me. "You lost?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," I said quickly, embarrassed. "Just looking." He chuckled, handing me a rag. "Then make yourself useful." I took it, and for the next hour, I stood beside him, pretending to polish the car, while mostly just watching how focused he was. The sun hit his skin, making the sweat on his arms glisten, and I hated myself for staring, but couldn't look away. That was the first time I realized how dangerous this little lie was becoming, because every moment with him pulled me deeper. He started opening up, too, little by little. I learned that he had grown up in a small town not far from the city. His father had been a mechanic, his mother a nurse. He'd been driving since he was 14, helping his dad fix cars. "Engines make more sense than people," he told me once with a shrug, and I laughed harder than I should have. He had dreams too, small ones, but real. He wanted to save enough to open his own garage one day. "Nothing fancy," he said, "just a place where he could be his own boss." I admired that. He wasn't chasing luxury or status. He just wanted freedom, independence, something built with his own hands. The more he talked, the more I wanted to listen, and the more I listened, the more I wanted him to know me too. The real me. But every time I came close to saying it, every time I felt the truth bubbling up, fear stopped me cold. Because what if, the second he knew I was Caldwell's daughter, everything changed? There were moments, though, when I thought maybe he suspected. Once I slipped and mentioned something about my father's office upstairs. His eyes narrowed for a second, but then he let it go. Another time, he caught me looking far too comfortable in the library, curled up with a book I had pulled from the family collection. "You read a lot for a maid," he teased. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, but I laughed it off. "Keeps me sane," I said. He accepted it, for now. But the closeness grew, slowly, quietly, in stolen moments. One evening, a thunderstorm hit, shaking the house. The power flickered out, and I found myself in the kitchen, lighting candles with the staff. Daniel walked in, dripping wet from rushing to cover the cars outside. His shirt clung to him, and I tried not to stare. He shook his hair out, laughing at how drenched he was, and for a second our eyes met in the glow of the candles. Something unspoken passed between us. It was so brief, but I felt it. that spark, that possibility. And yet, every spark was tangled with guilt. I was falling for him under false pretenses, and I hated myself for it. That night, lying in bed, I asked myself why I hadn't told him yet. The truth was simple. I didn't want to lose what we had. I was scared that the second he realized who I was, I'd go back to being the untouchable heiress in his eyes. And I couldn't bear the thought of that. For now, I told myself I'd keep the secret a little longer. Just a little. But deep down, I think I knew I was already in too deep. The longer I kept the secret, the harder it became to breathe around him. On the surface, everything felt so natural, like two people slowly finding comfort in each other's presence. But underneath, my chest was tight, and the guilt gnawed at me like a constant echo in the back of my mind. Still, I couldn't stop myself. I wanted more of those moments with him, the kind that made me forget who I was supposed to be. It started small little conversations here and there. He'd catch me in the hallway carrying linens the wrong way and roll his eyes with a smile. Or we'd run into each other in the garden and he'd ask if I knew the difference between weeds and flowers. I didn't. He laughed at me for that. But then there were longer talks. Like the evening he offered to drive me to the market because the housekeeper said she needed more supplies. Of course, I had no business going, but I volunteered before I even thought it through. And suddenly I was sitting in the passenger seat of the Blacktown car, trying not to look like the boss's daughter enjoying her father's driver. The ride was quiet at first. He had the radio on low, and I remember glancing at his hands gripping the wheel. Strong, steady, calloused. Not the kind of hands I grew up around. Those were hands that actually built things, fixed things, protected things. "You don't talk much," he said, finally breaking the silence. I laughed softly. "Maybe I like listening more." He glanced at me, then nodded. "That's rare. Most people like to fill the air with noise." That simple line stuck with me. Because he was right. Most people around me were always performing, trying to impress, trying to be heard. But with him, silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was safe. At the market, I was useless. I didn't know how to pick the right vegetables or bargain with the vendors, he noticed, of course. "You really are new at this," he teased, shaking his head as he traded a few bills for fresh bread. I bit my lip, embarrassed. "I'm learning." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second his teasing softened into something else. Something gentler. "You'll get there," he said. The drive back felt different. There was a warmth between us, unspoken but undeniable. And when he pulled up to the house, I didn't want to get out. After that day, I started seeking him out more. We'd talk in the evenings when the house was quieter. Sometimes we sat outside near the garage, the air heavy with the smell of gasoline and fresh-cut grass, and he'd tell me about his childhood. He spoke about his younger sister, who had 2 kids and worked double shifts at a diner. He said he helped her whenever he could, sending money or fixing her car for free. He told me about his father's old workshop, how he still remembered the sound of wrenches clinking against the concrete floor. And I told him bits and pieces of myself. The safe parts. I said I went to college but left out where. I said I liked reading, but didn't mention that my books came from a private library that could rival a small town's. I kept it vague, trying to seem ordinary, terrified of slipping. But there were moments when I felt myself breaking. Like when he smiled at something I said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and I wanted to tell him everything, who I was, what this was. I wanted to ask if he'd still look at me the same way. Instead, I stayed quiet. One night, though, things shifted. I found him in the garage again, working on the engine of one of the cars. His shirt was dirty, his hands covered in grease, and I thought he'd brush me off, but he didn't. He handed me a wrench, saying, "Here, hold this." I laughed nervously. "I'll break it." "You can't break a wrench," he replied, grinning. So I stood there, clumsy but eager, while he explained what he was doing. I didn't understand half of it, but the way his voice softened when he taught me, like he actually wanted me there, made my chest tighten. At some point I asked, "Do you like working here?" He paused, wiping his hands with a rag. "It's a job, pays the bills. But no, this isn't the dream." "What's the dream?" I asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "A little garage of my own, maybe in a small town. Nothing big, just enough to make a living without anyone telling me what to do." There was a silence after that, and in that silence I realized how different our worlds were. He dreamed of independence. I had been born into a cage lined with gold. And yet, sitting there with him, I wanted his dream more than my own reality. That night, lying in bed, I cried. Not because of him, but because of me. Because every moment I spent with him made it harder to imagine a future where he looked at me with the same warmth once he knew the truth. The secret was becoming unbearable, but I couldn't let go. Every day, I told myself, tomorrow I'll tell him. But tomorrow always came, and I always stayed silent, because I wasn't ready to lose him. Not yet. By the time summer was halfway over, Daniel had become the part of my day I looked forward to the most. It didn't matter if we were talking in the garage, sharing coffee in the kitchen, or just passing each other in the hallway. Something about his presence made me feel lighter, safer. But the more I let myself fall, the more dangerous everything became. I wasn't the only one noticing. One afternoon, I was sitting outside with him on the back steps, sipping iced tea while he told me about a road trip he'd taken years ago with some friends. We were laughing, our shoulders brushing just slightly, when I caught the housekeeper's eyes watching us from the kitchen window. She raised her eyebrows, a knowing look spreading across her face, and I felt heat rush to my cheeks. I quickly stood, mumbling something about chores, and walked inside. My heart pounded against my ribs. If she suspected, how long before someone told my father? That thought alone should have been enough to scare me into stepping back, but I didn't. If anything, it only pulled me closer, because with Daniel, I could breathe. He wasn't intimidated by me because he didn't know who I was. He wasn't trying to impress me with big words or business talk. He made me laugh in ways that felt effortless. He listened, really listened. And every time our eyes met, I felt like he actually saw me, not the heiress, not the daughter of Caldwell Construction, but just me. The problem was, the closer we grew, the harder it was to keep my story straight. One evening while we were walking back from the market, he asked, "So, how long have you been working here?" My chest tightened. I had rehearsed vague answers for weeks, but suddenly my mind went blank. A little while," I said, my voice too quick. He glanced at me, curious. "Where were you before?" Panic flashed through me, but I forced a shrug. "Different places. I moved around a bit." He didn't press, thank God, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't fully buying it either. Later that night, I stared at myself in the mirror and hated what I saw. Not because of the makeup I'd smudged off or the dress I'd borrowed from the back of my closet, but because of the lie staring back at me. What kind of person builds a connection on dishonesty? What kind of woman falls in love under a mask? And yet, the very next day, I went back to him. There was a moment in the garage that changed everything for me. He was teaching me how to check oil levels, his hands guiding mine as I fumbled with the dipstick. The closeness of him, the warmth of his skin brushing against mine, made the world blur. When I finally managed to get it right, he smiled at me, his eyes soft. "See? Not so hard." I should have laughed it off. But instead, I looked at him, really looked, and the words slipped out before I could stop them. "You make me want to be better." The silence that followed was heavy. His smile faded into something deeper, almost searching. He didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice was low. "You already are." I swear, in that second, I thought he was going to kiss me. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it. But then, as if sensing the danger of the moment, he stepped back, clearing his throat, and the spell broke. I walked away, shaken. Because now it wasn't just playful attraction, it was something real. And real meant risk. Over the next days, I noticed him pulling back slightly, like he was fighting against whatever was happening between us. He was still kind, still teasing, but there was a hesitation in his eyes. Maybe he felt it too. Maybe he knew this was crossing a line. One night, I overheard two of the gardeners talking. They were laughing about the boss's daughter sneaking around like a ghost in her own house. My blood ran cold. Did they know? Had they seen me with Daniel? I wanted to hide. I wanted to disappear. But the truth was, I didn't want to lose him. Not yet. Then came the evening that almost gave everything away. My father had guests over, business partners, investors, the kind of people who lived in suits and smelled like cigars. I had been instructed to join the dinner, but I made up an excuse to stay out of sight. I slipped into the kitchen instead, where Daniel was finishing up a delivery. He looked surprised to see me there, dressed in something far too elegant for a maid. "You look different," he said slowly, his eyes scanning me. Panic flared. I grabbed an apron from the counter and tied it around my waist like armor. "Had to help out," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't argue, but the look he gave me lingered. Curious, suspicious. For the first time, I realized just how fragile my little charade was. One wrong move, one slip, and the entire illusion would shatter. But even knowing that, I couldn't stay away. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, I found him outside near the driveway. He was leaning against the car, looking up at the sky. I walked over, my heart pounding with every step. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" I asked suddenly. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "All the time. But I figure, maybe belonging isn't about places. Maybe it's about people." His words hit me like a punch. Because that's exactly what I felt with him. Like I belonged, like I had finally found the one person who made me feel grounded. And I knew then that no matter how dangerous this lie was, I wasn't ready to give it up. Not when it meant giving up him. By the time August rolled around, it didn't feel like a summer job anymore. It felt like I was living two separate lives, the one my father expected of me, full of rules and appearances, and the one I had carved out in quiet corners with Daniel. With him, I laughed more than I had in years. He made things simple, uncomplicated, like the world outside didn't matter. But the truth, that ugly, suffocating truth, was always there, waiting to explode. It was a Saturday evening when something changed. The staff had the night off, and my father was out of town on business. The mansion felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet. I wandered into the garage, half hoping Daniel would be there. And he was. Sitting on a stool, wiping down tools, music playing softly from the little radio he always carried around. He looked up, surprised to see me, then smiled. "Couldn't stay away from the grease and gasoline, huh?" I laughed nervously, leaning against the doorway. "Maybe I like it here." He tilted his head, studying me for a moment, then set the rag aside. "You know, you're not like the others." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "The other staff," he clarified, though his tone suggested more. "You don't act like them. You don't even know how to act like them. It's like you're pretending." The words hit me like ice water. My throat went dry, and for a terrifying second, I thought he had figured it out. But then he chuckled softly and shook his head. "Doesn't matter. I like that about you." Relief flooded through me, but so did guilt, because he wasn't wrong. I was pretending so hard I barely recognized myself sometimes. We ended up talking for hours that night, about dreams, regrets, childhood memories. He told me about the time he almost got arrested for drag racing when he was 17. I told him about sneaking books under the covers as a kid because I hated the parties my parents threw. At some point, I realized we were sitting closer than we should have been, our knees brushing. Every time he looked at me, it felt like my chest would burst. And then it happened. It wasn't some grand, dramatic moment. It was simple, quiet. He reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering just a second too long. I looked at him, and before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in. Our lips met. It was soft at first, tentative, like neither of us wanted to scare the other away. But then, as if something inside us both broke free, it deepened. His hand moved to my cheek, mine gripped his shirt, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. When we finally pulled away, breathless, he let out a shaky laugh. I probably shouldn't have done that. Neither should I whispered, but neither of us regretted it. From that night on, everything shifted. We weren't just dancing around something anymore, we were in it. Fully, recklessly. We stole moments whenever we could. Shared glances in hallways, whispered conversations in the dark, quick kisses when no one was looking. And yet, even in the middle of this happiness, the secret loomed larger than ever. Every time he called me new girl, every time he assumed I was just another employee, my stomach twisted. One morning, over coffee in the kitchen, he asked casually, "So, what about your family? You never talk about them." I froze. My mind scrambled for an answer. "Not much to say," I muttered, staring at my cup. He raised an eyebrow. "Everyone's got something to say." I forced a smile. "Maybe someday." He let it go, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Later that week, my father returned from his trip. The contrast between my two worlds hit me harder than ever. At dinner, I sat at the long mahogany table, surrounded by crystal glasses and polished silverware, listening to my father talk about business deals worth millions. Across the room, Daniel stood by the doorway, waiting to drive my father after the meal. Our eyes met for the briefest second. My heart clenched, because in that moment I realized just how impossible this was. To my father, Daniel was an employee, a man who opened doors, carried bags, drove cars. Nothing more. If he knew what was happening between us, he would lose his mind. And Daniel, he had no idea the girl he kissed in the garage was the daughter of the man signing his paychecks. I wanted to scream, to stand up and say, "This is who I really am, and I don't care what anyone thinks." But I couldn't. The fear was too strong. And then came the close call. One afternoon, I was in the library reading when my father unexpectedly walked in with Daniel trailing behind him, holding a folder. I scrambled to hide the book in my lap. My father barely glanced at me before barking orders about some meeting, then handed Daniel the keys to take him into the city. But Daniel's eyes lingered on me, just for a second. Confused, curious, like he was putting pieces together he hadn't noticed before. When they left, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the book. The walls were closing in. The secret couldn't last forever. And yet the thought of losing what we had, the laughter, the kisses, the way he made me feel human, was unbearable. I told myself I had time, that somehow, someway, the truth could come out gently. But deep down, I knew the truth never comes gently. It comes crashing down, and I was standing right in the middle of the storm. It couldn't stay hidden forever. I think a part of me knew that from the very beginning. Secrets have a way of clawing their way out, no matter how carefully you try to keep them buried. The first real crack came on a Sunday afternoon. My father had invited a group of associates over for lunch, and the house was buzzing with activity. I tried to keep my distance, sticking to the kitchen where Daniel usually lingered when he wasn't driving anyone around. But fate had other plans. One of my father's friends, a heavy-set man with a booming voice, caught sight of me as I carried a tray of glasses into the dining room. He squinted, then laughed. "Well, if it isn't little Miss Caldwell, all grown up now. Your father never stops bragging about you." The tray nearly slipped from my hands. My face went pale as every pair of eyes in the room turned to me, and Daniel was standing right there, holding my father's jacket. The silence that followed was unbearable. My father chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off. Yes, my daughter. Don't mind her. She likes to keep to herself. I forced a smile, muttered something about helping, and darted out of the room as quickly as I could. But not quickly enough to miss the look on Daniel's face. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was worse. It was confusion. Betrayal. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my room, my stomach in knots, waiting for the inevitable. That night, he found me in the garden. The air was heavy, the sky dim with the last hints of twilight. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. So, Caldwell's daughter, huh? His voice was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard it. I swallowed hard. Daniel, how long? He cut me off. How long have you been lying to me? The words stung, but I couldn't deny them. Since the beginning, I whispered. He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. Unbelievable. All this time I thought you were different. I thought you understood what it meant to actually work for something. But no, you've been playing dress up. Tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean to trick you. Then what was it? His eyes burned into mine. Some kind of game? The rich girl slumming it with the driver for a little excitement? No, I cried, my voice breaking. I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen. Not as Caldwell's daughter, not as some heiress with money in the bank, but as me. And with you, that's what I had. You didn't look at me like I was some porcelain doll. You looked at me like I was a person. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. I could see the conflict in his eyes, anger battling with something softer. But anger was winning. You should have told me, he said finally, his voice low but firm. From the start. You had plenty of chances. I was scared, I admitted, the words tumbling out like a confession I'd been holding too long. Scared you'd look at me differently? Scared you'd hate me? And maybe I was selfish, but I couldn't bear to lose what we had. For a moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas in the garden. Finally, he shook his head. You already lost it. The words cut deeper than any knife. I reached for him, desperate, but he stepped back. Don't. And just like that, he walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tears soaking into my pillow. My chest ached like something had been ripped out of me. I kept replaying his words over and over. You already lost it. The next few days were torture. He avoided me completely. No teasing in the hallways, no shared conversations in the garage. If we crossed paths, he barely acknowledged me. His silence was worse than any argument. I thought about telling my father, about confessing everything just to force it all into the open. But what good would that do? My father would fire him on the spot, and that was the last thing I wanted. So I stayed quiet, hoping, praying that maybe, somehow, I could fix this. It wasn't until a week later that the ice finally cracked. I found him in the garage again, late at night, tinkering with one of the cars. I stood in the doorway, watching him, my heart pounding. Daniel, I said softly. He didn't look up. What? I'm sorry. My voice trembled. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want this to end before it even started. He sighed heavily, setting the wrench down with a clatter. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes tired. You don't get it, do you? It's not just about the lie. It's about trust. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? I stepped closer, tears spilling down my cheeks. Because what I feel for you is real. Every laugh, every look, every moment we both know that wasn't fake. You know it. His expression softened, just slightly. For a second, I thought he might reach for me, that maybe the wall between us could crumble. But then he turned away, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know anymore. And just like that, the distance between us felt wider than ever. After that night in the garage, everything between us felt broken. The easy laughter, the stolen glances, the quiet comfort, they were gone, replaced with silence and distance that cut deeper than any fight. Daniel did his job as if nothing had happened, but I could see the difference. He avoided looking at me, his answers clipped, his posture stiff whenever I was nearby. It was like he had built a wall around himself, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't climb over it. I told myself to give him space, but space only made the ache worse. Every time I heard his voice down the hall, every time I caught a glimpse of him walking to the garage, my chest tightened. I missed him. One evening, I found myself in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty glass of wine. The housekeeper walked in, pausing when she saw me. She gave me that knowing look, the one she always had when she suspected more than she let on. You care about him, she said softly. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. She sighed, shaking her head. Love doesn't survive well on lies. Sooner or later, you'll have to choose. Tell him the truth, the whole truth, or let him go. Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I made a decision. The next morning, I waited for him by the car before he left for errands. He looked surprised to see me standing there, but not pleasantly. What do you want? He asked flatly. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice firm despite the tremble in my chest. He glanced at his watch. I'm working. Please, I whispered. Something in my tone must have softened him, because he sighed and nodded toward the garage. 5 minutes, we sat on the bench inside, the smell of oil and metal surrounding us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally I took a deep breath. I know I hurt you, and I know nothing I say can erase that. But I need you to understand why I kept the truth from you. He crossed his arms, his jaw tight. Go on. I've spent my whole life being treated like glass. People see my father's money before they see me. Every friend I had growing up wanted something from me. Every guy I dated was more interested in my last name than in me. And when you walked into that dining room and thought I was just another maid, my voice cracked. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I felt like someone was looking at me, not at Caldwell's daughter. And I was terrified of losing that. His expression flickered, but he stayed quiet. I should have told you, I continued. I should have trusted you enough to know that maybe, just maybe, you'd still see me the same way. But I was selfish. I wanted to hold on to that feeling as long as I could. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The silence that followed was unbearable. My heart hammered in my chest, waiting for him to say something, anything. Finally, he let out a slow breath. Do you even understand what it felt like for me? To realize the girl He stopped, shaking his head. To realize the girl I trusted wasn't who she said she was? It made me feel like a fool. I never wanted you to feel that way, I said quickly, tears spilling down my cheeks. What I feel for you is real. Every moment we had, it was real. I need you to believe that. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in weeks I saw the struggle in his eyes, the anger, the hurt, the lingering affection. Why me? He asked quietly. You could have anyone, some rich guy in a suit, someone who lives in your world. Why me? I stepped closer, my voice trembling but steady. Because you're the only one who ever made me feel like I was enough, not because of money, not because of a name, just because of me. For a long moment he said nothing. The weight of his silence crushed me. I braced myself for rejection, for the final blow that would end it all. But then, slowly, he reached out and brushed a tear from my cheek. I don't know if I can trust you again, he admitted, his voice low. But I don't want to stop trying. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a shaky sob. I nodded quickly, desperately. Then let's try. Please. I'll be honest from now on. No more lies. No more pretending. He studied me for a long moment, then finally pulled me into his arms. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I buried my face in his chest, clinging to him like he was the only thing anchoring me to the ground. We stood there in the garage, holding on to each other like the world outside didn't exist. But I knew it wasn't over, because my father still didn't know, and sooner or later he would. And when that day came, everything we had would be tested in ways neither of us were ready for. It didn't take long for my father to find out. Secrets, especially in a house like ours, don't stay secrets for long. One evening, I walked into the dining room to find him standing at the head of the table, arms crossed, his expression as cold as the marble floor beneath us. Daniel was there too, standing stiffly near the doorway, his face unreadable. "I hear," my father said, his voice low and dangerous, "that my daughter has been spending a great deal of time with the help." The room spun around me. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I might collapse. I opened my mouth to speak, but Daniel beat me to it. "With all due respect, sir," he said firmly, "it's not like that." But it was. We both knew it. My father's eyes narrowed. "You think you can fool me in my own house?" He turned to me, his gaze sharp. "Is this true?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. For the first time, I didn't want to hide anymore. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "I love him." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's face turned red, his jaw clenched. "Love?" he spat, as if the word disgusted him. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? Throwing away your future for a driver?" I felt Daniel stiffen beside me, but he didn't move. He just stood there, silent, waiting. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, my voice stronger now. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing something for me. Not for the company, not for appearances, for me." My father stared at me, shocked, as if he didn't recognize the daughter standing in front of him. And maybe he didn't, because for once I wasn't the obedient heiress. I was just a woman in love. He finally stormed out, muttering under his breath about mistakes and consequences. And just like that, the confrontation was over, but the damage lingered. For weeks, the tension in the house was unbearable. My father barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was curt, clipped, full of disappointment. Daniel kept his distance, worried that pushing too hard would only make things worse. But little by little, things began to shift. My father saw that this wasn't some fling, some rebellion I'd grow out of. He saw the way Daniel treated me with respect, with patience, with a quiet love that money couldn't buy. And slowly, his anger dulled into reluctant acceptance. It wasn't easy. It took months, arguments, cold silences, and tears. But eventually, he stopped fighting me. He didn't give us his blessing, not exactly, but he didn't stand in our way anymore. And for us, that was enough. Looking back now, I know how close I came to losing it all. My lie nearly destroyed the one thing I wanted most. But maybe that's the strange thing about love. It doesn't grow in perfect conditions. It grows in the cracks, in the messy, painful places where honesty finally breaks through. Daniel and I are still learning, still figuring it out. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. There are days when he looks at me and I can see the old hurt flicker in his eyes. And there are days when I still feel the weight of guilt pressing on my chest. But then he takes my hand, or smiles that quiet smile, and I remember why it's worth it. Because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. If you ask me now whether I regret any of it, the lie, the risk, the heartbreak, the answer is no. Because without it, I never would have found him. I never would have found myself, so yes, Once upon a time, a wealthy heiress was mistaken for a maid. And instead of correcting the mistake, she let it unfold. She stumbled, she lied, she hurt, and she almost lost everything. But she also fell in love. And in the end, that love was worth it.